we're going to have 3 quizzes such as this, 3 of them, including this. 3 of them up until the final exam. We're going to have 3 of these, including these 3 quizzes, same style, all 30 questions. Then each counting as 30 as raw score, right? Maximum 30 as raw score. Then at the end, I'll add up all these 3, then 90, right? At maximum, 90. Then I'm going to add 40 raw score for attendance and participation, because I ask questions, right? I put you on the spot, right? Asking questions. That attendance, that participation, 40. So altogether 130. Then the rest of 70 comes from the final exam. Final exam, same style, multiple choice, plus 2 essays. Okay, 2 essays. So 30 multiple choice, 40 from the essay section. So altogether 70. So altogether 200 raw scores. My message, the first quiz, my message to you is just this. To get an A, you need to study a lot. To get an A. I mean, if you want to get a B, it's okay. But to get an A, at least, you need to really read carefully everything. Listen to what I say. My role here is to just help you, right? Help you, because, you know, at least I think I help you save some time, right? Understanding the textbook. So I think lectures, I hope that help you. Second, next week, I'm going to be abroad. I'm going to be in London from 6 to 10. Slight change to the original plan I mentioned to you. I'm going to be back because of you. I'm going to be back. I changed my mind. Come back 10th, on the evening of 10th. Then going to have a class 11th Friday. Okay, 11th next week. So Friday we have class next week. Okay, Friday we have a class. Then Tuesday next week, I'm going to give you, after we cover chapter 5, which is international conflict, this Friday, we're going to move on to chapter 6, which is terrorism. Okay, so conflict, terrorism. Then after that, I'm going to give you, for the first time, I'm going to give you my article, which has just been published in America. So you have an opportunity to read how I write. So I'm going to give you my article, which is an analysis of terrorism and civil war in a particular place. So study chapter 5 and 6, and as a practice, you have a chance to read an analytical article on terrorism and civil war. And that will be included in the second quiz. So Tuesday, no class, okay? Don't come to class, but at home, you read my article on terrorism and civil war. Yes, next Tuesday. No class. Okay, which is, what date is that? 8th, no class, read my article at home. 11th, come to class and read chapter 7 for the 11th. Chapter 7. Then, the next week, which is the midterm period, okay? The next week, the midterm period. Tuesday, no class. 15th, no class. 15th, no class. But Friday of the midterm week, you're going to have the second quiz. Okay, which is, what date is that? 18th. 18th, here, same style, second quiz, which is in the midterm period, covers 4 to 6. 4 to 6 plus my article. My article, just 25 pages. About 25 pages. About 25 pages. But it should be a good one because, you know, you just read just very condensed summary of all the information. But my article is different from this. My article is just standalone analysis of one particular like a phenomenon. Okay? So read it. Is that clear? Now we get to, before we get to chapter 5, I understand that we have remaining 2 sections from the foreign policy chapter. Last week, because of this microphone problem, we had a little bit of rough class. But they bought this new one, brand new, works fine. So today should be fantastic. Now, foreign policy, to go over the last section of foreign policy chapter, which is legislatures, then let us conclude, okay, on the entire chapter. Here, legislatures, in here, the important point about this, you know, we studied, you know, how individual leaders, right, their mindset, how individual cognition, psychology, how that works in the foreign policy making process, right, which is not quite in the scope of political science, which is a little bit outside the scope of political science, right, like psychology and other subjects. But here, the question is, we did cover interagency conflicts, how that affects foreign policy. Like, for instance, the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, when they have conflicts over a certain issue, that affects foreign policy, right? Or even intra-agency conflict within different departments, different sections or departments within the foreign ministry. That's also possible, right? That affects foreign policy. Or individual conflicts, right? Now here, the issue here in the section of legislatures is that what happens if a president has a conflict with the legislative body? That's the point. Is it possible for a president which represents the executive body has a conflict, has a different view on foreign policy from the legislative body, Congress? Possible, possible. Here, particularly the American case, you need to remember different powers a president and Congress has over foreign policy, which is called checks and balances, right? In an American-style foreign policy, Congress, both Congress and the president has powers, divided powers over foreign policy. You need to remember this. What powers then does the Congress have on foreign policy? What powers? Most important power of Congress is budgetary power regarding foreign policy. The most important power Congress has over foreign policy is a budgetary power. Clearly, the main figure, is Congress main figure regarding foreign policy? No, the main figure is the president, okay? Is the president. Second, Congress is always secondary, okay? That's important. That's important. But Congress still has powers. That's the point, okay? Like budget, okay? Major foreign policy acts should be approved by Congress, particularly wars. Wars should be approved by Congress. Without the approval of Congress, the president cannot push for a war. A deployment of troops. The president cannot deploy troops overseas without the approval of Congress. What is this kind of regulation called in the American context? This kind of regulation is called War Powers Act. This kind of power Congress has is called War Powers Act. Uniquely American, like a kind of a division of power between the president and Congress. Like for instance, under which the president, according to the War Powers Act, the president should notify Congress within 60 days, okay? When he or she deploy troops, within 60 days, the president should notify Congress. Okay? Otherwise, the president should recall the troops. That's the War Powers Act. What other powers the Congress enjoys? Number one, passing budgets. Passing budgets. Second, approve main diplomatic figures like ambassadors through hearings, congressional hearings. Through congressional hearings, main diplomatic figures like ambassadors should be approved by Congress. That's second item. Number three, main treaties with foreign countries should be also approved. Treaties to go into effect, it should be approved by Congress. Signing is done by the executive, signing, okay? But after the signing, when these diplomats come back home, they need to report to Congress. Then Congress pass these treaties through the congressional process. Otherwise, however many treaties they sign, doesn't have any effect. So that's the power Congress has over foreign policy. Like free trade, treaty with Korea, that had already been, approved through the congressional process in America. Immigration policy. Immigration policy, major immigration policy, whether to open or close immigration policy, that should be approved by Congress. So that's that. The textbook moves on to compare how president-Congress relations differ under parliamentary systems. Like in the UK, they compare it. Please read it. How different the UK, in the British context, how executive, legislative, or presidential, congressional power, diplomatic power, foreign policy power, how it is negotiated. Go ahead and read the comparative section here. Now, the final conclusion of this entire chapter. Just having studied foreign policy making, what kind of conclusions can we draw from this chapter? Having studied, like all the aspects of foreign policy making. As a scholar or as a student of foreign policy study, are we interested in particular foreign policy, or are we interested in the process of foreign policy? Process of foreign policy, okay? Process of foreign policy is much more important than a particular type of foreign policy, okay? How do we reach a certain foreign policy outcome? What is behind a certain foreign policy outcome? The process of it. That's what we are interested in. The process, foreign policy process. Second, naturally, by nature, we look at foreign policies of different countries, right? Foreign policy of the United States, foreign policy of China, foreign policy of Korea, even foreign policy of North Korea, foreign policy of Canada, foreign policy of Kazakhstan. All different countries have its own foreign policy process and outcomes. How do we study all these? As a scholar, as a student of foreign policy, what is this unique type of foreign policy study called? If we study different countries, foreign policies of different countries, the type of inquiry, what is this type of inquiry called? Studying foreign policies of different countries. Comparative foreign policy. Okay, comparative foreign policy. Like a much higher level of foreign policy study is comparative foreign policy. Much more high-level inquiry. Comparative foreign policy. Why? It's different from individual country foreign policy study because we compare. Right? We compare. Better than individual foreign policy study. We need to get there. That's the goal. That's the ultimate goal of foreign policy study, comparative foreign policy. What's the goal? What's the goal of comparative foreign policy? The goal. Kim Yoo-jin, do you know the goal of comparative foreign policy? I just mentioned that comparative is better than individual. What's the goal? By comparing, what do we want to know? Changhira, by comparing, what do we want to know? Okay, I'll go quickly because we don't have time. 조영진, what do you want to know? By comparing. 권세원, what do you want to know? 김다운, what do you want to know? 김민경, what do you want to know? Which foreign policy is best? What's the definition of best?
That fits the situation.
Fits the situation. So by comparing different countries' foreign policy, we need to know which country has a foreign policy best fit to a certain situation. Okay, best fit. Is there good foreign policy and bad foreign policy? Okay, just a second. Kim Soo-min. What do you want to know? You know, comparative foreign policy, right? Comparing foreign policies of different countries. What do you want to know? She said, you know, you heard, right? Do you agree? I don't think it's 100% right. Kim Ye-rin, what do you want to know? What? Right? I mean, learning from at the very beginning, learning begins with imitation. It's not, you don't have to hide. Learning begins with imitation. You just copy someone else's opinion. But if you repeat the copying, then you could develop your own opinion at some point. So it's okay. I mean, you can read it from the text. What did it say?
Whether similar types of societies or governments consistently have similar types of foreign policies.
Okay. Okay. Right. So similar types of societies, similar types of governments have similar types of foreign policy outcomes. Right? Right? Good point. Because it is right, because it is written in the textbook. Right. By comparing, we want to know, here country A, implements a type A foreign policy. Country B, type B foreign policy, type C foreign policy. We want to make a pattern out of it. Right? So that internally similar countries, when they implement similar foreign policies, really domestic structure is really definitive. Okay, good point. More importantly, if you go one step further, the goal, in my opinion, more important than this, more important goal for me is whether or not, okay, why certain countries are more warlike than others. That's the goal. More specifically. Okay? More specifically. Why certain countries become more aggressive than others. Along the same line, as Kim Ye-rin said, but more specific goal is why certain countries attempt at war more frequently or more peaceful. There are three things that explain this. Number one, size. Second, wealth. Third, extent of democracy. These three things are very crucial in determining the tendencies, warlike tendencies of countries as foreign policy outcomes. So size, wealth, types of democracies or extent of democracies. Do you agree? What's your name? Yunsul-chan? Yes. Population size or territorial size, both of them. Population size, territorial size. Yes. Size, wealth, extent of democracy. If you want to add one more, maybe political culture. It's just side note, political culture determines tendencies, warlike tendencies. If you look at these, factors that determine tendencies, what comes to your mind? Is this kind of a realistic assumption or liberal assumption? Definitely it's a liberal assumption. Because just by nature, we proceed from internal structure. Right? Internal structure. These are all internal structures. Size, wealth, types of democracies, political culture, these are all internal characteristics of state. So, by nature, foreign policy study proceeds from realistic assumption or liberal assumption. This is the most important thing in this chapter. Foreign policy study, by nature, or comparative foreign policy, complies with realistic assumption or liberal assumption? Liberal assumptions. It contradicts realistic assumptions. This is not my opinion from the textbook. It contradicts realist assumptions. Now, another thing. Question to Kim Yu-jung. Kim Yu-jung. We know that by nature foreign policy follows liberal type of inquiry, okay? And it has benefits, right? It has merits. It helps us understand much better international politics. Because wars are driven from internal nature of countries. That's the lesson. It helps us understand wars, right? International wars. But it has benefits and merits, but do you think just read it from the textbook. One negative side. It has merits, but one negative side. Do you think by following this type of inquiry, liberal inquiries, do you think we have a general theory of when and how, under certain circumstances, countries go to war? Kim Yu-jung, do you think so? Why is that? Right. She learned the survival techniques. Exactly right. Because liberal assumptions or foreign policy study, it has merits. It's a good type of inquiry, but it's a kind of a inductive type of inquiry. Right? Inductive, meaning a conclusion is already here, but then you branch off into different cases. All different cases, opposite to deductive inquiry, right? So the problem with this, negative side to this is that countries are so different. Countries are so different. Although we have 3 different criteria, like size, wealth, types of democracies, but even that doesn't lead to a theory. General theory, right? And even as you include individual characteristics, then makes explanation very dirty. You can never come up with a theory, general explanation, because it depends on individuals. Because it depends on a one crazy leader, president. Then you have a war. Right? You can avoid it, but in terms of theory, right? Generalization, there is no prediction. You can never predict. That's the downside to foreign policy study. So this is why page 147, first line, second paragraph from the bottom. The attempt to explain foreign policy in a general, a theoretical way has met only limited success. So if you don't like it, realists, they go ahead and attempt at general realistic theory. State as a unitary actor. That's very important to have a general theory. State as a unitary actor. State as a unitary actor, which is very important. What's the meaning? State as a unitary actor, you don't care what's inside. You don't care what's inside. That's the meaning. State as a unitary actor, meaning it's a black box. The state is a black box. Nothing is differentiated inside the state. Even the size, wealth, democracy doesn't matter because the state is a unitary actor. That's the realistic assumption. So wars have nothing to do with internal characteristics according to realistic assumptions. Wars occur because of systemic characteristics, anarchic structure, structural characteristics of the international system. That's realistic assumptions. To repeat. Now, chapter 5. Wars and international conflict. Wars and international conflict. To give you some of the summaries of this chapter, why we study, what we study, what aspect of wars and conflict, to give you some of the summaries. I think wars, conflicts, definitions are not clear, right? Wars, conflict, or sometimes insurgency, or low-intensity conflicts, or terrorism, right? All different words. But in defining whatever that is, conflicts, wars today, particularly after 1991, after the Soviet Union, we are in a new era. The nature of wars or nature of conflicts are changing. That's an important point. Nature of wars, types of wars are changing. Different types of conflicts. This textbook goes ahead and lays out different types of wars and conflicts. Some of these wars are becoming obsolete. Some of these wars are disappearing. And new type of war is becoming more established. So we want to study what types of wars and conflicts are more frequent in today's international politics? That's the first point we want to examine. What types of wars are more frequent? So to understand that, we need to study what kind of wars, what kind of conflicts and what kind of wars are there, out there first, right? The answer is this. Most frequent types of wars today, after 1991, the post-Cold War, most frequent types of wars, like global wars are disappearing, okay? The old types of global, total war, okay, everyone, every citizen get involved, that type of war, very rare today. Big wars, right? Big wars becoming very, very rare. The state is involved. The state leads a war. That is becoming very, very rare. Instead, more smaller type of wars are much more frequent. Okay? Much smaller type of skirmishings. In previous chapters, we saw that skirmishings are much more frequent. According to this textbook, there are three most important frequent wars today. Number one, ethnic war, or ethnic conflict, if you want. Ethnic war or ethnic conflict is the most frequent type of conflict. So here, we need to ask, what is ethnic war? Right? What is ethnic war? What is nationalism? Right? Why that occurs? Why ethnic war occurs in the first place? Why is nationalism important? Second type of most frequent war, religious war or religious conflict. Again, why religion? What does it have to do with wars? Why religion and war? Why religion and conflict? Because if we think of religion, religion is mostly, right, peaceful. It's a good thing. But why does it have to do with wars and conflict? It's a very odd situation. Third type of most frequent wars today is territorial conflicts. Territorial conflicts. These three, according to this textbook, ethnic war, religious war, territorial conflicts. These are most important types of wars in the contemporary today, after 1991. If I add one more, if I wrote a book, if I add one more, which is resource war. Many wars today related to resources. Countries compete for the procurement of raw materials and resources. So that you could add, resource wars. The famous professor in America, Michael Clare, right? Michael Clare, he is the most well-known scholar in this field, resource wars. He had a book several years ago, Resource Wars. If you read that book, Michael Clare, then you could have a much better understanding of this new, much more contemporary type of new war, which is resource wars. This book doesn't cover that. Now, First, let's discuss then what types of wars are there. What types of wars are there? These are the types of wars. In the very beginning, this textbook begins with the largest contemporary wars, right? The largest contemporary wars. This PowerPoint is made out of the previous edition of this textbook, same textbook. The previous edition lists these two wars as the most largest contemporary wars. But this edition, what two wars are listed as the biggest contemporary wars according to this edition? Different wars, right? Previously, several years ago, Iraqi war and wars in Western Sudan, Darfur, listed as the biggest war, but in a new edition, different two wars, right? Wars in Afghanistan and Somalia. I don't know how he decided on these two wars as the biggest contemporary wars. Maybe in terms of death tolls or money involved. I don't know. But he selected these two wars, Afghanistan and Somalia. Afghanistan is still here? Okay. There have been 13 wars. No, there are currently 13 wars going on globally. 13 wars. Okay. This also came up in the previous chapter. There are 13 wars. All of them in the poor, developing region. Not surprising, right? There is no war going on in America, right? In terms of territory, right? America is involved, but there is no, physically there is no war in America. There is no war in Western Europe. All in the developing, poor countries. Yes?
Does Korea count as state?
No, Korea is not in war because we signed truce, peace treaty. Not peace treaty, but like a semi kind of peace treaty after Korean War. So technically we are in a peacetime. Korea is not in war. But sometimes Kim Jong-il, North Korea, they're much worse than war, right? Their behavior, right? But only in talk. That's a good side, right? That's a good side. Right, developing poor countries and geographic location, more specifically Africa, South Asia, and the Middle East. Mostly. There is a map that shows this. Okay, there is a map. That'll come up just a while, shortly. Exception is Colombia and the Philippines. Okay, let me show you that map here. So the thick red line shows most of the wars take place, right? That inside that thick red line. Okay, that's where most of the wars occur. Maybe if you look at the map, why wars occur, why conflicts occur, might have something to do with poverty, right? Development, problems, because it's mostly in the southern developing countries. Exception is, according to this textbook, Colombia and the Philippines, but mostly within that line. Now, types of wars. There are several types. Number one, hegemonic war, total war, limited war, things like that. Hegemonic war is a global war. Okay, hegemonic war, probably in terms of size and magnitude, the biggest war, systemic war. It's a global wide war, right? It has a cycle of about 100 years. Doesn't happen frequently, right? It happens 100-year cycle. Hegemonic war. Is hegemonic war becoming more possible or not possible today? Not possible. These types of war no longer possible. Okay? Total war. The definition of total war. Like I said, the government mobilizes citizens. Okay? The government puts everything into that war, including people, money, symbols, everything. That's total war. Hmm? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It could be possible between two countries, but it just means that the government mobilizes the entire country. That's the meaning, including citizen, nationwide mobilization. That's the meaning, total war. Again, total war, it doesn't say, this textbook doesn't say that. Probably. The last total war was World War II. Since World War II, we haven't seen total war. We haven't seen total war since World War II. So it's becoming very rare. Again, total war is becoming very rare. Which means many wars today, either limited war, right? Many wars today, either limited war. Limited war meaning like America sending troops, dispatching troops to Afghanistan, right? Then America still, economy is just normal, right? Having a war at some place, in a limited scope, then having a normal life, normal economy, normal politics. That's limited war. This is becoming more and more frequent. Limited war. Right? Civil war. What is civil war? Civil war is wars between factions in one society. Not interstate. Civil war is internal war. Different factions, different political factions, or different ethnic groups within one state. That's civil war. Again, civil war is becoming more and more frequent. Let me ask you, which is more brutal? Interstate war, interstate ethnic war, or interstate total war? Maybe total war is not a good example, but interstate war, interstate ethnic war. Like different ethnics have wars between interstate. That one. And internal civil war, which is more brutal. Civil war is much more cruel than interstate war. I don't know why. There is no explanation, but convincing. Makes sense. Makes sense. Sometimes these days, even in Korea, sons kill their parents. And they are betrayed by, right? Their people. They become really crazy. So, Won Chang had a good question. He approached me asking, wasn't World War II hegemonic war also? So total war plus hegemonic war. Then I said, no. No. Why? What is hegemonic war? Hegemonic war is a war in which hegemon A, right, is replaced by hegemon B. Hegemon A was the UK. UK ruled from much of 19th century, right? Much of 19th century. And much of 18th century, France ruled. So much of 17th century, the Netherlands. Much of 16th century, Spaniards. So this is how hegemonic wars take turns, right? Changing different hegemons. Now, hegemon of the 19th century UK was replaced by the United States, but not through World War II. Not through World War II. Again, then what particular war? Through what particular war the UK replaced the United Kingdom? There was no war, actually. Hegemonic change doesn't always, right, happen through wars. But if happens, it is a 100-year cycle. It is right, 100-year cycle. So hegemonic war, it's a war over control of the entire world order. So rules of the international system change because of that war. So, ooh. Did I write that? Last hegemonic war. Won Chang, my apology. My apology. So World War II, according to him, both hegemonic and total war. The last hegemonic and total war. Okay, it's interesting. Okay, the UK rose as a hegemon after World War II. That's something I knew, something I learned from this class. Something I learned from this class. The United States replaced the UK through World War II. I learned it from this class. Okay? Okay, that's good. All right. We need a lot of discussion. But simply speaking, put simply, we can make that statement, possible statement. But again, subject to a lot of controversy. But we go by this textbook. Okay, we record World War II as a hegemonic war. At the same time, total war. Okay. your point is taken. Now, so I'm not gonna use this PowerPoint. Next, why big wars, including hegemonic and total war, why big wars are becoming obsolete? Because of weapons, because of military technologies, okay? Because modern weapons are much more deadly, right? So psychologically, you're not gonna wage a war anymore, particularly big ones, right? Unlike World War II, World War I. If you attempt at that kind of war today using modern contemporary weapons, right? No one will survive. So because of technology, big wars disappears. Total war. Again, the last total war, World War II, the goal is to reach the capital city and the surrender of that country, right? The first total war, according to him, the first total war, Napoleonic War. That's the first total war. Why the Napoleonic War was the first total war? Won-chang, don't you know that? Why Napoleonic War is listed as the first total war? Why French War? But then before that, French War, which is, when did it happen? When did it occur? Napoleonic War. Maybe early 19th, right? Early 19th century, right? Am I right? Right, early 19th century. That was the first total war, meaning before that war, all the wars were not total in terms of mobilization. Won-chang, don't you know that? Why that French war listed as the first total war? It has. I think you're not going to believe me anymore. It has, in my opinion, it has something to do with, later it comes up, things like how nation states were created. That comes up later in this chapter. It has something to do with that. The French was the first, probably the modern nation state, okay, under national flag. He unified different smaller political units under one national flag, nation state, okay, in the European continent. So that made that total war possible under one flag. So probably that's why he says that this was recorded as the first total war, mobilizing, different people under one national flag, right? Much easier to mobilize people so that you have a much larger scale war, right? Mobilizing many people, massive number of people. That's how it listed as a total war. And it has also to do with industrialization. Total war has something to do with also industrialization, right? So integrating society and the economy. Last total war, World War II. So after World War II, we haven't seen total war again. Because after World War II, the trend is for smaller wars. Smaller wars and civil wars, internal wars, and more recently, terrorism. More recently, terrorism, insurgency, those types of wars. Much more contemporary types of wars. And state is not the leader in those wars. Non-state actors are leaders in these wars, like terrorist groups. The limited war, it's military actions carried out to gain some objective. But these objectives are limited. Okay? It's not total surrender. Okay? Maybe partial. Partial surrender, partial occupation of some territory. Example, the wars America had to retake Kuwaiti territory from the Iraqi government, Iraqi leader, 1991. That's limited war. And sometimes in the form of raids, different military strategy is needed. To wage these kinds of war, you need different types of strategies, like raids, much more common. And low intensity conflict, right? Raids, guerrilla types of wars, low intensity conflict. Okay, these are all related. Now, then we'll get to the causes of war. Page 107. Causes of war. Theories of the causes of war. The question of why war breaks out. Right? The question of why war breaks out. I think we covered this pretty much in previous chapters. Why war occurs. Right? Broadly, three types of levels of analysis. Three types of levels of analysis, but this textbook added one more level, like interstate. Normally, individual level. What's the second level? State level, right? State level, then domestic level, sorry. Individual level, domestic level, systemic level, right? Systemic level or global level, these three. But this textbook added one more level, which is interstate level. There must be some reason for that, but I don't see that much need. But he added one more, interstate, because interstate meaning wars occur purely because these two countries had problems, regardless of, right? Regardless of systemic, global imperatives. When these two countries have problems with each other, then war can occur. That's interstate explanation, which is convincing, but in many wars, how come only two countries get involved, right? Everything, I think the reason why I skip this is that interstate can be subsumed under global level, because I don't see separate interstate level having nothing to do with global level. That's my kind of position. Individual level, we all know, right? cognition, psychology, right? Individual traits of leaders, their cognitive thinking, psychological misperceptions, miscalculations of leaders that lead to wars. Nothing special except this. Domestic level, foreign policy study, we cover this. Domestic level of causes of wars. We pretty much looked at this in the foreign policy study, domestic level. Again, nothing special except that. Interstate level, I mentioned that. Global level. The causes of wars are found at the global level or systemic level. This textbook raises some particular aspects here. Because, systemic and global, again, he treats these two a little bit separately. Systemic, global, a little bit separately. The kinds of things he looks at the global level analysis as the causes of war, he looks at, what does he talk about? Like cycles, right? He talks about cycles. Wars occur globally. Wars occur because global economic system has cycles. Cycles. Economic cycles. It's called cycle theories. In other words, he talks about major wars are cyclical according to like long economic waves. Long economic waves. This is cycle theories. Or more particularly, it's a specific theory called Kondratiev cycle. It's a long economic cycle model that also can explain wars. Hegemonic cycle, we mentioned that. Hegemonic cycle, 100-year hegemonic cycle. Okay, just take note of that. So long economic cycles can explain wars. Kind of interesting theory. Interesting theory. But in general, again, IR scholars suggest that global level wars are becoming less and less possible. Right? That's another conclusion. So causes of war, I think we covered pretty much. Okay? I'm not going to elaborate much more on that. A lot of you may refer to this PowerPoint when you prepare for the exam. Now, nationalism, ethnic wars. Ethnic wars, page 160. The definition of nationalism first. What is nationalism? Nationalism is devotion to the interest of one's own nation over others. Just textbook definition. Is it important for us? Is nationalism important for us? Important thing? to understand in world politics? Yes. Yes. He says that the most important force in world politics, nationalism, definition of which definition is this? Nationalism is the most important force in world politics. Oh, in the past 2 centuries. It's not in 10 years. In the past 200 years, nationalism has been a sustainable factor in the last 200 years. Right? In other words, many wars over the last 200 years related to nationalism. Ethnic factor. There have been many ethnic wars. But nationality, he says, nationality is a difficult concept to define. Difficult concept. What is nationality? We know what nationalism is, but what is nationality? It's a difficult thing to define. What comprises nationality is a difficult thing. It goes on to discuss how nationalism, which is one of the most important force in world politics over the last 200 years, how nationalism combined with the other important force in world politics, which is sovereignty, national sovereignty. How nationality combined with the state. This textbook goes on to discuss this, how nations mixed with the state, which is called nation-state. Nation-state, the meaning. What's the meaning of nation-state? One nation. One nation, one state. That's nation-state. One nation forms one state. That's nation-state. Which is ideal. Ideal form of politics. Nation-state. One nation, one nationality forms one state. Why ethnic wars? Why conflicts over nationalism occur? Because one state, one nation, this principle is not yet established. If every state today follows one nation, one state principle, then you're not going to have ethnic wars. We have many ethnic wars because still we have many, one state, many nations. Right? One state, many nations, or many nations, one nation, no state. Sometimes. Many times. One nation, no state. Many combination of problems with nation-state combination. Because of that, we have ethnic wars. Again, why ethnic wars? Ethnic wars occur in rich countries. What's the tendency? Ethnic wars, where ethnic wars concentrate geographically? Southern, developing, poor countries. Mostly Africa, Middle East, South Asia, or former Soviet Union. These are the places, geographic location where many ethnic wars occur. This is the place where many nations still lack the state, their own state. On the other hand, rich, advanced countries, they abide by this principle, nation, state. One nation, one state. The exception is the United States. But United States, different dynamic, right? One state, many nations, right? America, one state, many nations, but there, he explains it, their dynamics of nationalism in the United States much more different than other places. Now, how did nation state evolve in historically? That's how he discusses how nation state emerged in the western part of the world. First, France, right? How France became a nation state, he discusses that. There are two ways of becoming nation state. Either states created nations or nations created the state. What's the advanced Western countries model of creating nation state? Did they follow the model of states creating the nations or nations created the state? Western states, Western rich countries. States first, they created nations. States followed by nations, right? State created nations. That's Western rich country model. Poor country model, which is much more frequent today. Nations trying to create the state. That's poor country model. Much more divisive, warlike, a lot of death toll involved. Nations creating states, highly problematic. Much more frequent after 1991. After 1991. After the Soviet breakup, right? After the Soviet breakup, after the breakup of Yugoslavia, there are many nations standing in line to form states. Also in Africa. It discusses self-determination in history, right? Then how Netherlands became a nation state, discusses how the UK became a nation state, how the United States became a nation state. Then comes down to the past 50 years, right? Nations then gained independence. Then today. Ethnic wars after 1991, much more nasty. There are several examples of ethnic wars after 1991, right? Why? When nations trying to create a state, why it becomes a civil war or ethnic war? He gives us good examples of that, right? The example of Kurds, the example of Kyrgyz, the example of Kosovo. It has a lot of lessons for understanding today's ethnic wars. The case of Kurds as a nation, as a nationality, same one ethnic group. Interesting point about Kurds is that Kurds do not have their own state, their own government. They live spreading around the Middle Eastern region in 4 different countries. which is not unprecedented in many different countries. But Kurds, they direct a lot of international attention. They live in different, right, foreign countries. Like, for instance, what countries are they spread around? They live in Turkey. They also live in Iran, Iraq, and Syria. Right? They get support from the United States, but sometimes Turkey dispatching troops to, right, suppress these Kurdish rebellions. Right? A lot of them live in northern Iraq. When Iraq was in a politically unstable situation, they became much more stronger, right? But then, you know, like again, the case of Kyrgyzstan. Why he talks about, maybe you have better knowledge about this. Kyrgyzstan. There, the Central Asian region, ethnically very complex. Central Asian region, very complex. Won-Chang, let me ask you, in Central Asia, in terms of state, you're very useful for this class. In terms of state, Central Asia, the definition of Central Asia, how many states in terms of the state? How many states in Central Asian region? You know where Central Asia is, right? Formerly under the Soviet Union, but they became independent after 1991. Then they became an independent country. There are 5 countries. There are 5 countries in the Central Asian region, including your country. All stans. Stan meaning the state, land. The stan means land. So 5 Central Asian states, KKTTU. KKTTU. There are 2 Ks, 2 Ts, 1 U. These comprise the region of Central Asia, 5 states. K, Kazakhstan, land of Kazakhs, from which he is from. Land of Kazakhstan. Second, K, Kyrgyzstan, means land of Kyrgyz, T, Tajikistan, meaning land of Tajiks. Second T, Turkmenistan, land of Turks, Turkmenistan. Last U, Uzbekistan, land of Uzbeks. So nominally you have 5 ethnic groups, major ethnic group in each state, in each government, separate government. But there, the Central Asian region, the biggest threat, that region is ethnic conflict. Because, again, the state boundary doesn't match with ethnic boundary. That's the problem. State boundary doesn't match ethnic boundary. In other words, within the nominal state, you have many ethnic groups. Kazakhs, the state of Kazakhstan might have many different ethnic groups. Like what groups?
We have maybe more than 32 nationalities living in our country. And we basically have a problem with Kurds.
What?
We basically have like ethnical problem with
What?
Kurds. Kurds.
Oh.
They don't have actually like autonomy in our country,
Right.
and they just spreading around like countries in Uzbekistan, like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. They're trying to settle like some kind of autonomy in our countries, but the government don't like that.
I see. So how big is that group?
Not so big.
Not so big.
And we have like conflict, especially in my region. I'm living in the south part of the Kazakhstan.
Right. Right.
And they basically living there, but they know like native language, Kazakh language, and like Turkish language, and their own like Kurdish language.
I see.
Yeah, and they just trying to settle somehow like government, but it's so difficult for them.
Right. But Kazakhstan, luckily, I think, relatively free from really nasty type of ethnic wars. Despite that particular ethnic group, Kazakhstan relatively okay. Really nasty one here, Kyrgyzstan. Really nasty, Kyrgyzstan. Okay. So you need to think about it. You need to study, when you study nationalism, ethnic conflicts. This is also what this textbook says. In other words, ethnic factor alone doesn't get really that problematic. There are all different factors combined with ethnic factors. Right? Poverty, resource, energy, right? All other different factors, when it is combined with ethnic factors, then it becomes really problematic. So, why Kazakhstan relatively okay, why Kyrgyzstan is particularly problematic, probably inside must be different dynamic. Non-ethnic dynamic combined with it. That's what you need to look more deeply in studying different ethnic wars, different ethnic conflicts. So Kyrgyzstan is very, very famous one. And that nasty type of ethnic conflict erupted 2010, as this textbook mentioned, 2010. Ethnic wars usually erupt when political situation get destabilized, right? These Kyrgyz and Uzbeks, they lived together relatively peacefully until that time, 2010. 2010, there was a power transition. Dictator was kicked out. Dictator who was put in place by the United States. I forgot his name. And he was kicked out. And his main income source was he loaned at the airport facility to the United States at that time. So United States borrowed that land facilities from that dictator of Kyrgyzstan government, and the United States used it for war on terror in Afghanistan. Because Kyrgyzstan, if you look at the map, Kyrgyzstan is very strategically at a crossroads of like a main Central Asian trading routes. Okay, Kyrgyzstan, very important place. So countries like the Soviet Union, China, the United States, they must have some influence in this country, Kyrgyzstan. So U.S. dictator was toppled at that time, 2010. Then ethnic conflicts erupted. That's what this textbook talks about. So ethnic factor alone doesn't get anywhere. Must be something else. Oftentimes, ethnic conflicts worsened by outside great powers. This is the real aspect of ethnic wars. Great powers like Russia, China, the United States, they intervene in these remote ethnic conflicts. it kind of becomes, as you mentioned, becomes a proxy war. They exploit weak points, weaknesses of these countries, then realize their interest, great power interest here. So Kyrgyzstan, again, US, China, Russia get involved. So that's outside factor, external factor. Kosovo, very famous, Kosovo. I don't remember any other nation that is much more ethnically cruel than these people, like Eastern European. They just kill them, massively killed people for different, ethnic, different faces, different ethnic, different cultures. They just kill people. We can't imagine. Just a horrendous killing occurs in these parts of the world. So Kosovo, very famous. But the situation is very tricky there. Very tricky. Situation is Yugoslavia, which used to be an empire, right? Empire under which all different ethnic groups live together peacefully under one flag. But that flag disappeared. Central authority disappeared. The nations just became naked without any direction. Nations just became naked, right? Then that's exactly what happened in Yugoslavia, right? Then different ethnic groups raised their voice, but in reality, political boundary is so artificially drawn under Yugoslavia. Under empire, the political boundary, they didn't care about that. Ethnic boundary, political boundary, so mixed up. So different ethnic groups live together. Like for instance, when the curtain was raised, what happened was Kosovo, which is Muslim, Islamic town, where mostly Albanians reside, right? But inside Serbian political entity. This is the situation. But majority of Albanians. Serbians are Christians. Russian type of Christians. So this situation, Serbians smaller in size, but majority, politically powerful. They have political control. But there are lots of, I don't know how many, but lots of Albanians inside Serbian political control. Then when Albanians raised their voice for independence, Serbians just erased them. That's what happened. That's the situation. Then outside powers intervene, mediate, sending UN peacekeeping force. That's what happened at that time. And many places like this, in former Soviet Union also. Azerbaijan, Armenian, same thing. Just right next to Central Asia. The region is called Caucasus. Caucasus region. Caucasus region, there are 3 countries. Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia. They comprise Caucasus region. Again, they lived as nothing under the Soviet Union. But Soviet Union disappeared, broke up, they became independent. But same problem. When they became independent, the many ethnic groups living together under artificially drawn political boundaries. So the problem here is a lot of, there's a map here, page 163. Figure 5.2, this shows Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Right? Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. 5.2 figure, this is Caucasus. What's the geographical situation there? A lot of Azerbaijanis live inside the Armenian territory. That's the situation. A lot of Azerbaijanis live inside Armenian. Azerbaijanis, they claimed to the Armenian government, okay? They claimed to the Armenian government for independence, separate entity inside Armenia. Again, Armenian responded, right? As Serbians responded, same way Serbians responded. So a lot of Azerbaijanis killed. Again, coincidentally, Armenians Christians, Azerbaijanis Muslims. So again, religion is involved. Okay. Now, why ethnic hostility? That's the next question. Why ethnic hostility? Why different ethnic groups? Conceptually, why different ethnic groups hate each other? Right? Why different ethnic groups hate each other? One reason, ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism. Put differently, in-group bias. In-group bias. In other words, genetically people, they dislike people who speak different languages, appear differently, right? Have different cultures. Genetically people dislike them. They have bias toward outsiders. This is one theory. They dehumanize different ethnic groups. They call them pigs, right? They dehumanize. In other words, on the extreme situation, they don't take different ethnic groups as humans. Then next question is, if this is nature, if this is human nature, right? So ethnic wars are a problem of human nature. But the question is, can education ameliorate these ethnic hatred? Yes. In the Western European countries' case, education can mediate ethnic conflicts through writing good textbooks. History education, Western countries get out of this ethnic trap. That's how France, Germany, right, resolve their own ethnic hatred. But in the East Asian culture, that is not happening. Japan is a good example. That's why Korea, China hate Japan. Japan hates Korea, China. But here in this region, we don't see the examples of Western European countries yet. Okay. This Friday, we'll begin with genocide. Just finish up the rest of it. Main chapter for Friday is chapter 6, terrorism. Read chapter 6, terrorism, for Friday.